Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us on the third of our webinar series here at BSI. I can't see you, but I can hopefully, we'll get a chance to engage at the end of this, but really appreciate you taking the time to join us today to talk about this important subject around personal health data and how we best manage that. Alex, can you take me to the next slide? Thank you. Just a bit of housekeeping. As I said, your cameras and microphones are switched off for the duration of this. You can submit questions via that functionality in GoToWebinar. Hopefully that's fairly straightforward, and we will of course circulate the recording or make the recording available to all of you and those that have attended the previous two sessions that we've run recently. Thank you, Alex. So the idea today, we'll do a quick set of introductions to our eminent speakers that we've got to share their knowledge with you today. There'll be a bit of panel discussion with them, looking firstly at the legal perspective and also delving into the supply chain perspective. There's time hopefully for Q&A at the end of this, and then we'll sort of round around takeaways and summarize and talk to you about the next steps when we've finished hearing from our panel of experts. Alex, next slide if you would, please. So I'm Angus Metclaffe. I'm the MD for the healthcare sector here at BSI, joined by David Mudd, who heads up our digital trust practice in the assurance division of BSI, and by Conor Hogan, our practice head for data governance within the consulting services division of BSI. But more importantly, we've got two external speakers, Gerard Hanratty and Ali Khan. Gerard is a partner for Brown Jacobson, and Ali Khan, who heads up the governance and risk compliance at ZS Associates. So look, I'm going to just briefly summarize where we've got to this point. So Alex, if you can just give me the next slide, that would be great. So our first seminar back in September talked with external experts around why we should be digitizing personal health information, and gave the sort of clinical view and the societal benefits of that digitization of patient information, but also touched on the trust challenges, the risk profile and challenges of personal health information in that space. Our second webinar took a different perspective, certainly looked at the technological challenges and requirements, but also delved into the start of those legal perspectives, but also brought a really interesting perspective on what this felt like from an organization that had gone through a cybersecurity challenge, and that was really quite insightful. But both of those webinars are still available online if you weren't able to participate in them. Today we want to take a little bit more time to look at the legal perspectives, but also really focus in on the supply chain challenge. Hearing from our speakers specifically around that supply chain challenge in a second. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to David to introduce our first speaker and take it from there. David, over to you.
Thank you, Angus, and hello everyone. Thanks for joining us again. Before we dive straight into the core part of today, just a little bit of context. When we talked about the technical risks and issues in the second session, one of the key risks identified was the actual IT within the main providers, legacy IT and patching and risks around having your own service and this kind of thing. And there was a clear technological risk advantage of moving things, outsourcing, moving to a cloud-based model, this kind of thing. And besides reducing some of those cyber risks, it also brings massive benefits in terms of affordable scale, new and beneficial services, and a certain level of resilience. So lots to say to actually move to this model, but, and this is what we're going to talk through today, it comes with its own risks and its own challenges. Two key areas. Firstly, around cybersecurity again, but from a different angle. So the supply chain, digital supply chain story used to be, if you have sensitive data, the bad guys will try every angle to come and get to you, and the weakest link is the way in, and that might be through your supply chain. That story makes sense, but it's fundamentally changed with the proliferation of ransomware and denial of service. And now it is far more effective for the bad guys to, rather than go for an individual organization, look at key parts of that digital supply chain and attack them. If they do that, they don't just hit one organization, they can hit tens, hundreds, or even thousands with one attack. So rather than it being a niche way in to get to the heart of the data, now it becomes a principal attack vector to massively increase the blast radius. That's the first point. The second one is around the privacy challenges. Once you have this data moving through another network, controlling your privacy compliance then becomes a much greater risk as well. So two key reasons. And interestingly, on this second one, I'll come on to why we're just going to have a little switch around in the order of things today. So Ali wasn't able to join us for this session, but I caught up with him earlier. And as you'll see very soon, some really, really powerful stuff he went through. But one of the key points he went through as a responsible and diligent digital supply chain provider was around the issue of consent. And this was, I think, such an important legal issue. What we're going to do now is run through the supply chain perspective first, and then invite the legal experts to really comment on that. It's such an important point. So we're now going to go first to the supply chain perspective, and from my point of view, is an absolute exemplar of this is what you should expect from a digital service and supply chain provider in the healthcare sector. So let's hear what Ali had to say.
So Ali, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we dive into the heart of the topic, would you mind just giving us a bit of an introduction to yourself and to ZS Associates?
Sure, David. Thank you so much for inviting me over. So my name is Ali Khan. I lead ZS's governance, risk, compliance, and audit program. It's a global role overlooking our internal compliances as well as our third-party and client-related compliance requirements, trying to work along with our regulators and our testers and accreditors to ensure that we've got the right set of controls in place so that we establish better client trust. About ZS, it's our 40th year in the industry, in the market. We started in 1983 as a small two-member organization by two friends. That's Andy Zoltners, and that's where the Z comes from, and Prabha Sinha, where the S comes on, both professors in the US, who, while trying to solve some of these consulting related problems around sales and marketing for their own students, decided to go ahead and establish a company. And from there, 40 years has been a journey. We are about more than 13,000 ZSs across the globe, over 35 offices, working across in the Americas, in Europe, and Asia Pacific. We predominantly work a lot in the healthcare and pharma industry with a very high rate of repeat customers. And that's been more about us focusing on trying to solve across problems for providers and patient services and pharmaceuticals and the healthcare ecosystem.
Right, so very much a focus on healthcare in general and problem solving. Obviously, the focus is here around personal health information. Where does that sit in your list of priorities, yourself from compliance perspective, but also with ZS? Sorry, going Z, the British pronunciation, ZS, I should say. Okay. Where does it sit with you and with ZS?
So healthcare information, or PHI, is really very, very important for us. In the last 40 years, we've moved our focus from being a professional services or consulting firm to also a technology company. So we develop products for our clients on their specific, the needs of the healthcare and the pharma industry. We also do custom development as required. We have a lot of consulting engagements, which, again, when I look at PHI, I would first look at it as data, and data is currency. Now, ZS is famous for its data analytics capabilities when we leverage data insights to provide recommendations and leadership to our clients in terms of our services. When we talk about PHI, be it in the provider's ecosystem or in the patient's ecosystem, healthcare data becomes a very, very strong token of currency to understand at times from a diagnostics perspective, and at times even more from a consultative perspective. So there would be instances where we may be collaborating with third-party data vendors for conducting, providing us this data for our projects. At times, our clients would bring that into our ecosystem, and then there would be cases where we would also run some market research to collect these data insights. So PHI becomes very critical to our business. Now, when I say it does become critical, it is also necessary to manage it in an appropriate manner. Now, being a risk and compliance professional, I know when it comes to cardholder information, you've got the PCI DSS standard, and it's a straightforward 8-principle rule set. It's a no-brainer. You need to apply, and again, card data more exposed to fraud always raises that level of sensitivity. But when you talk about PHI data, it's got another level of sensitivity altogether. It is somebody's most intimate, most personal, most private information being shared with your organization by virtue of trust. Now it is not just a matter of compliance, but a matter of integrity for the organization to ensure that this data is protected and handled with utmost care. So for ZS, it is really, really very important, and we take a lot of care in terms of maintaining our compliances best practices around PHI data.
Right, so very high on your priority list, both from a perspective of its value to your business, but also I love that word, then really focusing on the integrity, and this isn't just about compliance, then around trust. So when you're putting together one of these digital transformation projects, what are the key stages and activities that you go through to ensure then that privacy and security of PHI can not just be trusted, but can be demonstrated?
So there are multiple things that we do, David. While from a regulatory factor, if you're dealing with data coming in from the US, the HIPAA security and privacy rule become quite prevalent. Again, that's quite prescriptive on what organizations must do and may not do. For Europe, apart from GDPR, you do have a lot of local nuances as well across various EU states. Right in Germany, you would have specific regulations to follow across. You will have others in France and so on. Now, specifically, when you look at the EU, you not only have country level regulations, but you would also have more specific regionalities. Now, irrespective of what regulations which come as a mandate you may want to consider in terms of applying your controls. What we also focus on is there is a commonality between some things that need to be done. The first one being data minimization. I think it is very important, irrespective of being forced by a regulation or not. When we are dealing with somebody's most intimate information, can we minimize it to as restricted as possible from business use? So when it comes across from a digital transformation journey, we strongly believe that if our apps that we create or our systems do not need to consume identifiable information, why not mask it at the input layer itself, or why not pseudonymize it at the input layer, so that while the raw data comes through, by the time it gets into data processing and it gets into the analytics, if you don't need the personal information, just have those de-identifiers applied. The second piece is, when it comes to PHI, we've got a separate controlled environment that we've created and invested into at ZS, highly restricted, where you will have data in clear text maintained. The access is very, very limited. very high controls in terms of encryption, access controls, right to access that would be monitored very, very regularly, both from a privacy as well as compliance standpoint. We do ensure that this system meets with requirements from a lot of our global standards. So while we started a journey with ISO 27001 and 277, we added 27701, 2717. We went on to attest across that not just from the ISO family, this ecosystem is well protected and demonstrating controls from other frameworks like the NIST CSF, NIST 800, 151, and so on. And yet meeting in accreditation requirements from the high trust organization, so that we're just trying to be 100% sure that we are doing our best and continuously keeping the rigor on. Apart from it, I think the awareness of end users as well. One of the pieces that we try to instill into our people working on these kind of digital transformation journey is to instill them from day one, right at the grassroots level, that they understand the security and privacy considerations. So be it for our developers, where we will be having in very focused security and privacy 101 trainings, understanding how do you handle and deal with setting up environments that's got sensitive data, to the end users who would go ahead and learn a lot about data management. These are mandatory courses, and irrespective of the level that you're working across, right? So right from an associate in the organization to a partner, as long as you're touching that ecosystem, you need to be aware, and we take that seriously.
Wow, that's a lot to unpick there, but what it does clearly show is that you're treating privacy and security as a top priority here. An interesting point you were mentioning around the kind of fragmentation of the regulatory landscape. And just for the audience benefit here, you mentioned 27001 and 27701, which obviously I know we've been working with you on for many years here. 27001 being the management system for information security, recently in the current revision now renamed really to cover information security, cybersecurity and privacy protection, and then 27701 being the privacy information management extension to that. Now you mentioned then a lot of other things, be that HIPAA in the US, as you mentioned, there's German regulations, HDS, health data hosting in France. Where does 27001 and 27, the ISO standards, sit in terms of helping support all these different and rather fragmented regulatory landscape? If I can just ask a bit of clarity around that.
So for me, ISO 27001 and ISO 27701 are both standards that establish a baseline security and privacy framework for any organization to work across, right? Now, I think at times we as organizations, in a jiffy to meet external compliance requirements, start pushing ourselves to read through controls and establishing controls. But unless and until you don't have a cyclic framework and a strong framework like ISO 27001 with the PDCA coming in to baseline some of the controls as a habit forming or a second nature of the organization, it becomes very, very difficult to scale across. So when it comes to our own work with PHI data, 27001, 27701 literally helped us start with defining our risk appetite and our risk tolerance, trying to put across our policies and procedural aspects in place, and then going into try and map across our statement of applicability, right? What controls should meet into what environment, who are the teams that are responsible, try to draw the RACI matrices and so on. And that really helped us put a very, very strong foundation to now very easily scale to adopt and adapt with various regulatory compliances across, even bringing the regional and geographical nuances, and also put across the right metric and measurement system to meet with our governance objectives.
Right.
So that cyclic mechanism has been with the help of these two standards. And, yes, I think thanks to BSI, we've been working with you for the last couple of years. That has not just worked across for us as having an auditors come on board, but more like soundboard for us, I would say, right? We look to continuously not just improve, but challenge ourselves to try and do more. And how can we, have a robust ecosystem? And, the BSI team keeps helping us challenge us more. So there's a lot to learn. We keep unlearning on our way as well, because I believe apart from learning, one thing that we've observed is you need to unlearn as you grow with time. And the BSI team really guides us and points us to that here are things you need to think in a different manner. And that helps. So thank you
That's
so
such a
much
good
for that.
point. Yes, that's such a good point about the unlearning. Sometimes you think, okay, this is it. We've always done it this way. But I think particularly in this field, the need to constantly refresh your approach, I think it's more important here in that constantly changing digital environment than anywhere else. So thanks, a really good point. And just again, for the audience perspective, PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act, part of the cycle that sits there across all of the ISO management systems, and that continuous improvement, I think, is continuous improvement alongside, as you said, Ali, as well, the fact you've got structure in there around everyone's roles and responsibilities and training. Those are all the things that sit around the edge, and the bubble in which those then technical controls that you apply actually sit. So it's really, as you said, around that overall culture within the organization. So what's obviously key here is you're a provider of digital services, but you're also a customer yourself. So just as we've been talking to the audience around the risk in their own supply chain, you're part of that supply chain, but you also have that supply chain yourself. So what are the key steps for you when you're looking to evaluate a potential collaboration partner or provider within your own digital ecosystem?
So again, as part of our own management systems, and even slightly before that, we've always had a third-party risk management framework in place with, again, quite standard to a process that any organization would follow, having a standard information collection SIG that would go across prior onboarding. We've realized that before we would even sign up with paperwork, even if we are doing a POC, in a lot of these cases, if it's data and specifically PHI being exchanged or accessed or touched upon, or interaction with our own ecosystem happening, it be it to the third party or the associated affiliated fourth party or the nth party right out there, we would want to do our due diligence. One, definitely prior onboarding. So we would go through various elements around security, privacy, business continuity, and then again, depending on the sensitivity of this nature of relationship, if it's a high risk relationship, now for me, anything involving PHI data automatically would trigger off the high risk, depending on the parameters that we've defined across, would go through subsequent follow-up reviews. At the same time, when it comes to our own third-party risk monitoring, we've also got tools and systems integrated across that would look at public ratings in terms of security, privacy, and give us the alerts to trigger off certain additional informational reviews through the time that we work there. I think one of the important aspects to consider while working with vendors and partners involved in either processing, collecting, or at times even doing market research for us with PHI data is what is their understanding and culture around understanding the sensitivity of PHI data.
Yeah. So again, more than just technical controls here when you're looking for evidence. Yeah. Exactly.
So the evidence is going to be a lot around their culture, their understanding, how much their people understand things around, the significance of PHI data. Some of the nuances that often come across is, I think, the data life cycle in itself, right? Right from beginning across with the right consents allowed or for collection of information to retention of information and processing that information. At times it is observed that time of collection, the information, the data controller may quite simply say it is for business use and purpose. But then when you look at it from the regulatory mindset, what are our regulators trying to tell us? They're really emphasizing on consent and notices. The consent and notices aren't supposed to be that fine print with really tiny letters on the bottom of your website that you say you agree and you sign up for. But the idea is to very implicitly call out what is my very, very sensitive personal data going to be used for. How is it going to be used? Where is it going to be stored? And I have a right to withdraw that consent right now. Earlier, it was only GDPR talking about it now, but as regulators across the world are enacting these, I think this concept of consent notice and withdrawal of consent is becoming quite robust. And the similar kind of points are coming across. Again, things around data localization, minimization of use. These are the stronger aspects. So for us, it is quite important to look at it holistically. While somebody may have the best of technical controls, but at a policy level, we aren't seeing that kind of commitment coming through. It really doesn't matter. You may have the best technical controls, but then again, it's not good enough for us.
Right. And then, so that's such a key point. Everything you're saying that you're looking for within your own organization, and hence putting a formal management system in place, ideally that's what you're looking for, and you're being just as rigorous with your supplier here as well. And it seems to me there's no shortcut here other than that need for due diligence. But I suppose when you're demonstrating your own expertise in this area to your clients, what do you do to make it easier for them? Because obviously you've got the skills here and you're going straight in there at a detailed level with the clients. Just as a last point here, how do you demonstrate trust to your clients? And what would be kind of the one takeaway, the one thing you would say for the audience out there for them to start with and to go for?
Okay, so when it comes to our clients, I think clients also look for assurance around having robust controls in terms of security and privacy ecosystem. It is not just about meeting client demands, right? It is about understanding that you are dealing with someone's individuality, somebody's identity out here, and somebody's really important information that at times they may not even want to disclose to their family members and relatives and friends. Now, our clients are looking at the assurance on how well you can handle this information, how well you can keep their customers' information safe. And it's not just about saying that we have the right control environment. For us, it's about our own values of doing the right thing. One thing that we relate to. So there is no option, or it's not it's a no-brainer for us that in order to meet our client trust, we need to do the right thing here. And we keep trying to strive ourselves to do it better day by day.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I was at a conference last week. We're talking around personal information, and particularly in terms of AI and the future. If there was one point of one step that came out there, how should we focus here? It all came back to doing the right thing and the culture, and that as the root really of trust. So that really resonates what you said there. And I think another key point we probably take away into further discussion is what you're saying around the consent point here, because I think that as one particular technical detail is something, again, we're going to have to focus a lot on. But in the meantime, thank you so much for sharing your insight, and such a good point there that the focus here isn't around compliance, it's around doing the right thing. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, David.
So some great insight, I think you'll agree there from Ali, and the work that they're doing at ZS Associates. As I said, for me, that really is the exemplar of what you would expect from a really good quality provider of services, digital services in the healthcare sector. And there was a lot. Obviously, as we said, there's no shortcut here, and it may seem daunting, but some of the tools and the tips that we're putting together to help you with this, I think will help crystallize that, and will be based very much on what Ali was saying. So we're now going to hand straight over to Conor, who's really going to pick up with Gerard on the legal aspects. And I hope, Conor, you'll touch on that consent point there as well. But in the meantime, Conor, yeah, over to you.
Thank you very much, David. Some really interesting insights, I feel, from Ali in that interview, and an awful lot of food for thought, really. Gerard, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here this afternoon, and I think it would be remiss of me to try and do you justice by introducing you. So maybe if you could, for the benefit of our attendees today, just give a quick introduction to yourself, the type of work that you do, and your role advising clients, especially in healthcare.
Sure, Conor. So I'm Gerard Hanratty. I'm a partner in Brown Jacobson. I also head up our health sector offering. My work covers public law, which is looking at all of the statutes and common law issues, and information law as well. We also do a lot of the regulatory work for healthcare in my team. Within that, we cover UK, Ireland, and we work internationally as well. And what we're starting to see now is a much greater need for advice over how do you process data safely, securely, and how do you do that across the world? So not just within the UK, not just within the UK and Ireland, but all around the world now.
That's really interesting, Gerard. And I think today, you know, the modern era that most organizations find themselves in, the digital era, the digital age, it is very much a global economy in which they are operating, and the proliferation of data, the depths of the supply chain that are supporting organizations through innovation. And we talked about the rise of the cyber attacks already in this series. But in terms of the specific digital supply chain that healthcare organizations are reliant upon today, can you give the audience an indication of just the breadth, indeed the depth, the volume perhaps of regulations and compliance requirements that are relevant for them, both maybe within the UK and indeed European and global perspectives?
Yeah, so currently we have two processes in terms of law which run together in this country and always have. So we have legislation, which everybody understands. Those are the rules issued by Parliament in acts and in directions and regulations. But we also have common law, and common law is a creation of law based on decisions by courts. So the principal one here is the tort of confidentiality, and courts have made decisions over when you may or may not breach someone's confidentiality, whether it's in the public interest to do so, and we have a large volume of case law around that. In terms of legislation for data itself, then people understand and know about the Data Protection Act and the UK GDPR. What we're starting to see now, though, is a build-up of the government actually realising that's fine as a basis, but actually they need to try and keep up. So technology has gone racing ahead. Now we're trying to get back on a level par in order to regulate it. So there's been a lot in the press about AI regulation. You know, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, all of them have said it needs to be regulated. Europe, I think, are further ahead than us. Perhaps I should say that carefully, but Europe are further ahead, and I think the UK will now start to look at what it can do. It probably wants to be a bit more permissive than Europe because governments inevitably compete with each other to get organisations to come and work in their system. But we'll start to see that. The other thing we're starting to see, though, is so we have the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill currently going through Parliament. That's going to add quite a bit to the Data Protection Act and the UK GDPR in terms of trying to bring it forward, bring it up into the 21st century, make it fit for purpose. We've also sorry, it's my Apple phone going off, so my wearable is showing off that it can do it too. We've also got the Digital Markets Competition and Consumer Bill, which is going through, which is quite interesting from the digital providers perspective, because that's a Competition and Markets Authority saying, you know what, we're going to come in here and we're going to do some regulation. We don't trust people just to go along and to have this digital marketplace without there being proper regulation across it. So we're starting to see a build-up in the parliamentary sense and in the legislative sense in terms of how we regulate and what we're doing, and we'll see more of that certainly on the AI side. And in terms of healthcare, the MHRA will come in with their regulations and will certainly do a lot more. The other thing you see, so in the UK, it's pretty difficult to be doing much in healthcare without some involvement of the NHS. The NHS is huge, one of the largest employers in the world. And within that, what you then start to see is that, so some of the additional things we have to think about there is the Caldecott advice we have. So Caldecott Guardians, well known within the NHS as being the people who look after patient data. But from that, we've had quite a lot of information from Caldecott over how we should actually look after somebody's privacy and give them the opportunity to not only opt into services, but also opt out. That's been a little bit difficult, to be honest, in terms of all the GP stuff that went on and getting people to understand the concept of opt-in, opt-out. Still a bit of work to do on that, I think, but everybody does think about Caldecott. We've also seen that come through NHS Digital, now part of NHS England, but they've produced a lot of guidance, and anybody who does work with the NHS in the UK has to make sure they comply with the Data Security and Protection Toolkit. Under that toolkit, there are quite a few data security standards. And one of those standards is very much about how do you work with third parties? How do you work with other organisations outside the NHS? And what we've actually found is that quite a few of our clients that are not NHS, but are actually working in the health sphere, will still use that as a pretty good basis as to how they look at working with others, how they look at their contract, how they make sure they have really good effective clauses, and how they make sure they protect and manage their relationships going forward so that they're compliant with the law and don't have to have too much exposure to the Information Commissioner as you go forward because of any issues. But it's quite complex, to be honest. You need to understand it. And the other thing we also have to factor into all of that is EU law. So UK GDPR is pretty similar, but the UK can't exist as an island, despite what it may have thought. It needs to be able to work with the EU, because otherwise you're not going to get all the organisations coming in. You're not going to drive that competition. You're not going to drive your market economy as you want to. And so within that, we take very much a lot of notice of things like Schrems 2. We look to see whether there are the places that we are sending data, are they safe? Do the governments there have an inappropriate backdoor, which was effectively what came through from Schrems 2 with the US? Do we have an arrangement with them whereby we have an understanding so that the data won't be misused? I think when you come to the actual supply chain as well, the other thing you have to think about is when you process data, you process it for specific purposes. The further down a supply chain you get, what are those purposes? How diluted is the consent you've got at the start, where all of the information starts to flow from? How diluted has that got, and how are people using it? Are the data controllers, are the data processors? You have to manage all of that, I think, within your contract, in your supply chain.
Wow, Gerard, there's so much to unpick there. The complexity of just the UK market, we could probably speak to that for the next hour, 2, 3, maybe even the rest of the week. What it does indicate, though, is that even just one market operating within that global market and wanting competitively to be part of the conversation with regards to the supply chain and innovation and the focus on data, there's a lot to do, right? So there are lots of regulations, there are lots of legislative considerations, and something that you said really resonated with me is even, for instance, if you are not supporting the NHS, you may still rely on similar principles, such as the DSPT, to vet your own supply chain or to demonstrate assurance in the marketplace. And actually, increasingly, we're seeing, for instance, federal law come into the conversation in the US. I suppose the prospect of federal law in privacy, there's already significant health regulation there, and indeed emerging laws and future laws being discussed around AI, as you've alluded to, but also around cyber resilience and around supply chain security and supply chain visibility. And as an outsourced BPO working in this space, sometimes I can put the blinkers on and sort of ignore all of the chaos that's unfolding everywhere else and just focus in on just the privacy matter. But you've mentioned something which really I find interesting. The steps that providers or anybody who wants to be part of a supply chain, the steps that they need to take to ensure compliance with not just their own regulatory obligations, but actually the assurances that they need to be able to provide their current customers, such as the NHS or others, and indeed to be able to demonstrate their bona fides in order to win continued work and sustain that digital trust in the digital supply chain. It's very complex, and so at a high level, you know, you mentioned contracts, for instance. What steps can organizations in the supply chain, you know, looking for visibility into their own, or indeed give assurance to their customers, what steps can they take to really make progress in that space?
So I think the starting point is you've got to do your due diligence. You've got to look at the obvious things of what is the certification these organizations have. Can they show they have proper secure systems? Do they have clear processes for looking after the data that you're going to provide to them? And are they clear as to what to do if they do get any attack upon them or any breach that's going forward? Within that as well, you have to be clear to understand what are they going to use the data for? How are they going to use it? So, you know, several years ago, and I thought a bit unfairly, to be honest, the ICO had quite a big go at Google DeepMind. Now, when they were working with the Royal Free, it sounded to me, and I wasn't involved in that piece of work at all, but it sounded to me from looking in from the outside that actually this was pretty helpful. You know, here is a program that will take different pieces of data relating to an individual, put them together, and then say to the individual's clinician, this person is starting to go off. You need to actually get them in, and you need to look at them, and you need to take some preventative steps here. So doing what I would call healthcare as opposed to sick care, which is what most Western health systems do. But the ICO didn't like that. I think really it wasn't like because it was Google involved, and it was then, okay, so who controls this data and where's this data then going afterwards? Now, it's important that you have control over that. So your contracts have to be really clear over how that is controlled and what happens with it. I think equally within the contract, you want to make sure you have an ability to get assurance continuously as you're going through, so that you can go and you can look at their systems. You know, anybody who says, no, I'm going to close all this down, you can't look at this is, you know, intellectual property and all of that, that should immediately set the alarm bells ringing and thinking, hold on, can I do business with these people? If I can't see what they're doing, I'm not very comfortable with this at all. And I think then it's about positive management of the contract. So you want clauses in there which are effective. We don't want clauses in there which are over technical in terms of how they're set out. Lawyers are great at doing this. We love doing it. It's what we were created for. When God created us, he said, make things as difficult to understand as possible, and then they'll always come back to you for interpretation. But what you really want is a clause that is very clear. And you want it clear for a few reasons. One, your customer, your client wants to understand it. But two, if you end up in court, you don't want to rely on a judge to have to interpret it. You want to be able to say to the judge, that's what it means, it's there in black and white. If you're relying on a judge to interpret what it means, then you've got to realize you're 50-50, because wrong judge, wrong day, wrong interpretation. So I think having the, you know, being able to say to your lawyers, I want you to simplify this and put it into language that people will understand. I don't care if the clause is longer. I want to be able to understand what it means. So I am sure that this is going to work for us and for our customers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Keeping it simple, making it effective, knowing, you know, what data you have, where it's going to, and then critically, where your suppliers might actually be sharing that data with in terms of third parties and fourth and fifth and sixth parties, because let's face it, that's part of your supply chain then as well, and you need to be able to stand over what is happening at those degrees of separation for your customers to get assurance over what it is that you're doing. And yes, I mean, I'm not surprised that a lawyer is suggesting that the contracts and the clauses are where to start, but actually then making it effective in an operational sense really is about bringing that to life. It's a decision about risk management really over the lifetime of that engagement and that contract. Because obviously, you know, we've heard a number of speakers in the previous sessions allude to cyber attacks, and David and Ali mentioning earlier, you know, that increasingly the supply chain, the digital supply chain, is a primary target for threat actors. And obviously that's when people, you know, and your clients tend to, I imagine, call you in panic and say, think, Gerard, we have a problem here. We suspect that we've been hacked, or somebody in our supply chain has had an issue. What do we need to do? And immediately it becomes a legal response as much as an operational response to the crisis as well. What sort of legal steps would you advise your clients to take in terms of minimizing damage in that supply chain attack, given it is such a primary focus today?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things with any, malware, ransomware attack that goes on is, when do you actually find out that it's happened? So, sometimes people realize, but they don't realize until it's been going on for quite a period of time. There's been a lot of data mined, a lot of data has gone out. I mean, the number of, simple pop-ups I get on my fairly straightforward, simple protection system, that, my password has been, stolen and whatever else, it's fairly regular. So these things happen quite a lot. So I think the first thing is, when you first got into all of this and you've been doing your due diligence, part of that should be, it's certainly in the UK, a data protection impact assessment to understand what are the risks with the data and how you're transferring it. So you have that. You then understand what's happening, and there's been a breach. So first off, you want to know, where's the breach happened? How is it being controlled? What are the controls going on? Because from the time of finding out you have a breach, you have a maximum of 72 hours to inform the Information Commissioner, on the basis that it's serious enough, and probably it will be. So you have to gather as much information as you can, and you have to try to lock down your systems or other systems. Now, that can be difficult. So if it's an attack whereby they've taken control of the system, which we've seen before in the NHS, then there's not much you can do, because you can't get in, you can't do much with it. What you shouldn't be doing, though, is uploading more information until you know your system is safe. That, unfortunately, times means you're stuck with pen and paper, especially in the health world, because you've got to record the treatment that you're giving to people, but you have to make sure the system is safe before you start uploading more data to it. If you can try to stop your system from sending any more information to the system that may be under attack. If you can kind of cut that, then again, that protects you even further. But then within all of it, you have to make your assessment of, right, so what are our steps going to be now? What are we going to tell the ICO we're going to do or have already done? So do we write out to all of our patients, our customers? Do we tell them as quickly as we can, this is a problem? You need to be aware of that in case you're cloned, your identity is taken. But you need to keep on top of the people, of the organization that is the principal target of the attack, and make sure they're doing everything they can. If they're not within this jurisdiction, then it makes it a little bit more difficult. But you need to keep talking to them and understand what steps are they taking, so that you can inform yourself of what to do. But realistically, once you're phoning your lawyer, the horse is halfway down the drive already, and you're trying to bolt the door after it. So then it's really about risk management of what you're doing and making sure all your processes are in place to stop any greater leak.
Absolutely, and that's a really valid point that we see an awful lot with our clients as well, is that it's shifting from the reactive, oh, now we need to do something, and like you said, when you're calling your lawyer or calling your insurer and calling your media and sort of comms people to try and get out of the story, perhaps get out in front of the story rather, like you said, the horse is already bolted. So becoming resilient to that requires due diligence, appropriate visibility into the supply chain, managing the risk associated with it, and for want of a better term, crossing the T's and dotting the I's on the contract and making sure that the clauses are effective in practice and being monitored. And that resilience will stand to you in terms of that moment when you do have to pick up the phone and realize, okay, we need help here. We need some cyber and privacy expertise. We also need the lawyers around the table so that we can get to grips with this. And to be fair, that really applies regardless of jurisdiction. Obviously, there are some jurisdictional differences in terms of notification obligations, who obviously might take the lead role in investigating that. Obligations maybe to report to the NCSC in the UK, or to the FBI in the States, and other institutions and law enforcement agencies as well. One of the things that struck me from David's conversation with Ali a little earlier, though, and I did want to just ask your position on it, or ask your thoughts on it before we run out of time, was given the extent of innovation that is happening today at a pace that we haven't ever seen before. You mentioned future legislation such as the AI Act in Europe and other ones maybe to follow in the UK and China and the US and elsewhere. Always lagging behind the innovation in and of itself. But one of the interesting interplays between existing legislation that exists in various parts of the world regarding data protection and privacy is consent in terms of the use and further use of data. That does become very difficult in a supply chain context. And, maybe there's no right answer, or maybe it's very difficult to answer full stop. But how can organizations manage the challenge of consent and indeed the withdrawal of that consent for use and further use, given the extent of innovation, the rise of the proliferation of data, and indeed the further uses or the completely unforeseen uses in the future that data could be put to?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is that in the UK, the ICO has never been a great lover of the concept of consent within healthcare because of the imbalance. A doctor saying to somebody, can I have your consent to use your data for this, that, and the other, when that person wants treatment, there's always been the view, well, they're hardly going to say no, are they, because they want the treatment. So there is that point that in most instances, you wouldn't expect that to be the only basis on which there has been processing going on. But the importance of it is that it is a basis, whichever way you look at it. And if somebody then says, I don't want you to process my data, and it's in a supply chain, then where is that data in the supply chain, and how do you know where it's going? So, at the minute we have an issue with one of our clients because they've been involved in a research project, and the probability is that a number of the patients they have are going to say, we want to withdraw from it, because they're kind of coming out from it too. Now, within that, so their data may have moved on and it may have been anonymized. Is the system, especially in this one, because this is an AI learning system, so it's getting data to understand how to do it, is that capable of then being withdrawn? If it's not, have you made that sufficiently clear to the individual by saying, we will try our best if you withdraw consent, but it may not actually be possible because of the nature of the learning that is going on with this particular piece of AI as we go forward. Now, if you haven't, there could be a problem. We've already seen that there's a number of authors who are actually having a go at some of these AI creators by saying, you have used what we have done in order to teach your AI, words and how to talk and language and that kind of thing. And you never sought our permission, you never sought our consent, you need to pay us for that. Now that's one way, but when you then get into the whole realm of you're using our personal health information in order to teach your AI, and as a result, you are going to make money from it, that's a whole different perspective, because what are people going to say? We don't think you should be selling your AI, we want paid for it. I mean, you need to make sure that your clauses are clear, not only in terms of your supply chain and where it goes down, in terms of how you control it and you can pull the data back and making sure you can still identify the data, but equally in terms of what you're saying to your customers, to your patients and going in, so that they understand what it is they're signing up to. And I think that's going to be a bigger and bigger part of what we do, especially with the development of AI. We know there's a hugely rich pool of health data around the world. Genomics proves that. If you can bring it all together, what an amazing, pool of information you have to improve healthcare, to make it more efficient, to get rid of some of the diseases like cancer and that have been, causing huge amounts of harm for years and years and years. But to do that, you need to make sure you take people, your citizens, on the journey with you and that they support it. And actually then you can move through to using this data and actually using the technology in the way that's beneficial for all.
That's fantastic, Gerard, and I really appreciate those insights, especially sort of bringing it together to focus on the people that really are at the center of the healthcare sector. Treatment of diseases, improving health outcomes, and as you said earlier, healthcare should be about health, not about sick care. And I really, really like that. Gerard, thank you very, very much for your contributions this afternoon. It's been fascinating. I will hand back now to David and to Angus for us to take any questions that may have come in through the course of our session. David.
Thanks, Conor. And yeah, we've got quite a few questions. We have not got much time. I'm going to pick up one that's particularly relevant, I think, to the last comments you were making there, Gerard, around AI. One of the comments was, what are the future trends going to be? What do we need to look out for? And a year ago, what was seen as something that was still semi-science fiction and out there, suddenly it's right in your face. And this shows how quickly this stuff can move. Absolutely, the biggest trend now is going to be, how do we strike that balance around data and use around AI? And so that absolutely, I think, and Gerard, you captured that perfectly there. There is, on one hand, you've got patients in a vulnerable situation and clinicians saying to them, share your data. You wouldn't want anyone else to go through that same pain, and you can help be part of that solution. And absolutely, we want to be driving responsible behavior around that. But at the same time, if that's then used for enormous monetary gains somewhere along the line, there is all kinds of ethical reasons and issues behind that as well. So I think that as a future trend is going to be so important. Most of the other questions we've had are around immediate next steps and where do I start. Very briefly to say, going back to the first couple of sessions with this, there are so many, I think you'll agree, there are so many individual nuggets of things to do, things that are immediate, get on with this now. The one thing I would say is, whether it's your supply chain or whether in your own organization, this all starts with knowing what data, what types of data you have where, coming in, being processed, being transferred around your organization, and what's happening to it. That has got to be the start point. Everything else, as Gerard said, around the contractual relationships, and as we've heard from Ali then, the other key thing is doing business with people is more than their compliance and their certificates. What are their behaviors, and how do they come across then as an organization that has the same vision you as trust? That's the other thing that came out really from Ali and I think from Gerard today. You know, it's that behavioral and that trust between people and organizations, as well as trust that's just there contractually and certifications. Sorry, Angus, I think we've just gone a little bit over time there. I'm going to hand back over to you just to round us up and tell us where we go from here.
Thank you, David. And I think that was a great summary. So the idea here is that we will, obviously, we've recorded this session as we have the other two, and we're looking now for your input as guests on this webinar to help us steer how we can best slice and share and cascade this knowledge and this insight more effectively. So there will be a survey coming out to you after we've finished, but certainly the intention is to take the highlights of our guest speakers, Gerard and Ali, and the other speakers that we've had over these last few sessions, and the insights that Conor and David have been able to share, and bring this into a really usable, digestible format that we will then share with all of those that registered, all of those that participated, and those sadly that couldn't make it on the day, so that we really have an opportunity to share this knowledge as broadly as we possibly can. So look out for that. Again, I guess it just falls to me to thank everyone for taking the time to be with us today. Particular thanks to Gerard, who's done 2 sessions today, one at 7 o'clock this morning. So I really appreciate, Gerard, you staying with this, and even more insights this afternoon. So thank you. And to the team, to Alex, to Krishna, to Conor, to David, really appreciate your support for these webinars. So thanks again. Look forward to speaking to you all again soon. Thank you.